They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but you can't get all the way to hell on good intention. There's one more vital ingredient: ignorance. A mixture of good intent with a healthy dose of ignorance is exactly the recipe that led to the absolute hell on earth we're revisiting today. This is the story of the biggest fire disaster in Iowa state history. And the reason the fire claimed so many lives is because people that didn't know better believed they could fix a problem they could barely understand, a problem within the human mind. I'd like to say we're wiser today, and I do believe we are, but make no mistake, when it comes to mental illness, we're dabbling largely in the dark. All too often, the people that pay the price for our ignorance are the people that most needed protection. We've learned a lot from this fire, and the evidence is written in the fire and building codes that to this day guide requirements for institutional occupancies like mental health facilities. But have we learned enough? Or must we sacrifice more human lives to learn how to better protect people from tragedies like this one? Make no mistake, the fire and building codes upon which our nation is built with the altruistic intention of preventing disasters like this one, those codes are written in blood, with the screams of those we lost in our ignorance echoing from between the lines of text. That's the truth of hard lessons that result in change. And while mental health care may seem to be less barbaric now compared to the treatments to which the residents of St. Elizabeth's Hospital were exposed, do we really comprehend the brain well enough to regulate it into the standards that we've defined as normal? We tell people suffering from mental health issues that help is available, medications exist, chemicals can be balanced. We tell them that even in their darkest moments, light exists, but no one expected the light in the dark to be the glow from an arsonist's flame. This is the tragic story of the St. Elizabeth's Hospital fire on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Quint Frisco. Are you looking for trouble, or did trouble send you looking for me?
A little bit of both.
Either way, pull up a chair. It won't make this podcast any less futile, but at least we can go down together.
You're turning me on.
Yeah.
Please be sure to check out the latest episode of the amazing podcast, Sasquatch and Sourdough. This past week, I got to record with the host over there, Christina, and we had an amazing talk about the fire that's been burning for 62 years in Centralia, Pennsylvania. So go take a listen, and while you're there, be sure to leave her a 5-star rating and a written review. You should also listen to the Or No series on the You Should Be Here podcast. I contributed 2 episodes to that amazing series that highlights victims of domestic violence, and each listen raises funds to support a charity standing up against domestic violence and human trafficking. It is completely free to you. Just search You Should Be Here on your favorite podcast platform. As always, the best way you can support us is to help us grow. There are so many ways you can do that. Podcasting is not free, and we're not asking for financial support. We're just asking you to leave us a 5-star rating, write a review, leave a comment on an episode, share content you see from us on social media, follow us on social media, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X, buy some of our merch from the link in the show notes, and of course, tell your friends. You can and should also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are so grateful for your support, and our ratings have been stalled out for months, so if you haven't had a chance to give us a rating, please consider taking a quick minute to do that in order to help us grow. As always, send us your fire stories, case suggestions, and feedback to crimetoburn@gmail.com. All right, now pack your bags. We are heading to the Hawkeye State, also known for corn and having the most pigs of any state in the nation. We're headed to Iowa, where on January 7th, 1950, the deadliest fire disaster in state history occurred at the St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Davenport. Now, while it was called a hospital, St. Elizabeth's was actually a building on a hospital campus. And this particular building was separate from the main hospital because it housed mentally ill patients, primarily women. There was another building on campus for mentally ill men, and at the time of the fire, there were at least 2 male patients at the St. Elizabeth's facility, but primarily it was a women's facility, and I'm not sure about the exact circumstances that led to them having occasional male patients. Now, to research this case, I read a book that will be referenced in the show notes by Brett Grimes named the St. Elizabeth Hospital fire in Iowa. And while I think Mr. Grimes did a great job of gathering a lot of information about who was there and outlining their experiences and even putting together a really good timeline, I offer my recommendation for the book with a caveat. Mr. Grimes is clearly not a fire expert, nor does he ever claim to be one. However, some of the information in the book was weak on fire science and fire code issues. And some of the assessments that he made about contributing factors were a little shaky, but overall I think the book is worth the read if you keep that in mind and you're interested in a deeper dive into the events that occurred that night. After all, I don't mind that Mr. Grimes isn't a fire expert. That's why I'm here to explain to you those issues. It's like my real-life job and everything. In fact, it is part of my real-life job. I have surveyed buildings just like St. Elizabeth's to help the owners and operators identify fire and life safety deficiencies, so you're in the right place to get the scoop straight from the fire nerd's mouth. One of the things, though, that is my biggest pet peeve in the entire world is when people call a building or structure fireproof, and unfortunately Grimes does commit this sin. He indicates that the main hospital was fireproof. It was not. There's no such thing. A brick building isn't fireproof, a concrete building, a metal building, an adobe building, a sandcastle, none of it's fireproof.
I don't think anything that exists is fireproof.
Because what makes fire spread is the interior finishes to some degree, but primarily the fire load, which is all in the furnishings, is what really makes the fire spread. All hospitals have anesthesia, linens, food stores, mattresses galore. All of these are amazing fuels that will spread a fire. All of them will burn when they get hot enough. And they will spread fire eventually to walls and ceilings. Now, we do use products with limited flame spread ratings, but that doesn't mean that they're fireproof. There are no fireproof buildings anywhere. We use something called fireproofing, which is where we seal penetrations in a wall using a listed system, but that system's designed to hold fire back for a minimum period of time based on the method that it's required to be tested at, not necessarily in the real world. But that doesn't mean it's actually fireproof. It's fire resistive, and that's only for a period of time. Even materials that don't easily burn can and will suffer structural weakening when exposed to super high temperatures. And nothing makes me want to slap people more than hearing someone utter the word fireproof. You know why? Guess what else was advertised as completely fireproof? The Weinkauf Hotel and the Iroquois Theater. 119 people died in the fireproof Weinkauf Hotel, and 602 people died in the fireproof Iroquois Theater. The fastest way to tell a fire protection professional that you know nothing about fire is to call something fireproof, so stop it. It makes me feel absolutely unhinged. And we've been telling people for literally hundreds of years that there's no such thing as fireproof, and I still have to make the correction, so stop it, please. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Feel free to share your pet peeve in the comments. I will happily share your outrage.
You know what makes me a little TO'd?
What?
Western music produced with MIDI instruments.
Oh yeah, that's lights my buns on fire.
See, compared to my outrage, don't you feel better now?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Let's take a brief break from the fire nerd stuff and talk about brain nerd stuff. Disclaimer.
Oh, yeah, brain nerd stuff, of course.
I am not a brain nerd. I got all this information from research, which is cited in the show notes, but if I get any of this stuff wrong, any of you brain nerds out there are welcome to reach out to help me understand what I got wrong.
That sounds like the king of all nerds, the brain nerd.
Brain nerd. We know St. Elizabeth's was a mental hospital. They treated patients diagnosed with schizophrenia, manic depression, which we now call bipolar disorder, and other similar psychiatric issues. And because this was the 1950s and humans are overly prone to hubris, the psychiatric doctors of the time believed that they could cure these issues in patients by exposing them to treatments that are considered barbaric by today's standards. And before you zone out completely, this is actually important to understand in our discussion of the fire. So the treatments used on schizophrenic and bipolar patients was called insulin shock therapy. This was the method that was initially, quote, discovered, unquote, by Austrian-American psychiatrist Manfred Sakel, S-A-K-E-L. He was using low doses of insulin to treat drug addicts and psychopaths when, oops, he overdosed a patient and insulined him right into a coma. But he claims that this was not actually an accident, but a psychological breakthrough because his patient experienced improved mental clarity after the treatment. So that was all the evidence Sakel apparently needed to begin treating schizophrenics with enough insulin to deliberately produce comas and convulsions.
So crazy plus bad behavior equals you go into a coma and feel better now.
Yeah.
Got it.
Some patients were also given electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT, while they were in the coma.
Well, at least they didn't have to remember it.
Now, electroconvulsive therapy is normally done under general anesthesia now, but if you've already doped your patients into a coma with insulin, then I guess you can just pass some electrical currents through their brains to give them a seizure. Now, ECT can be effective, but when it was first used, it was done without anesthesia, and so it was definitely considered barbaric. However, anytime someone undergoes treatment with general anesthesia, there's risks associated with the anesthesia, so it's not a first or even second-line therapy, but it is still used to treat severe depression, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. The amount of electricity used is less than can be delivered by a standard 9-volt battery, which is roughly 0.6 amps, and ECT uses only up to 0.4 amps.
Yeah, but it's like right on your brain. It's not on your tongue.
Right. But there's still risks, including memory loss, and the effects can be short-term, necessitating follow-up treatment. And this, along with the negative stigma of how barbaric early ECT therapy was, made it fall out of use, so finding places that still do it can be challenging. But I have personally surveyed hospitals that still use ECT and have ECT departments, and none of the people in the waiting room were there under duress, so it is effective for some people. So as we talk about the treatments that the people at St. Elizabeth's experienced, that is insulin shock therapy. And while they did sometimes use ECT with it, it's not the same. ECT is clinically proven and is quite safe. And I wanted to make the distinction in case anyone out there is considering ECT. I don't want to scare you out of it.
Bzz.
Now, Sakel claimed that with the insulin shock therapy, he had a success rate of over 80% in the treatment of schizophrenia. However, this was a dubious claim at best for many reasons. You see, the treatment was risky, and it required patients to be closely monitored even after treatment because they could go back into insulin shock. And so the facilities where they performed this treatment had patients that were usually given a lot of extra attention, a lot of group sessions, organized activities, walks, exercise, and a lot of one-on-one staff attention. So a lot of the critics claim that the success rates were because patients were carefully selected as those having the best chances for recovery, and then they were treated better than other patients in other types of facilities. And so perhaps some, or even maybe most, of their recoveries was based on that other treatment and not so much the insulin shock therapy. Also, insulin shock therapy had no impact on rates of relapse. And these treatments weren't without risks. To reverse the insulin coma, patients would then be given glucose through a feeding tube. So many of these patients started out by experiencing all of the worst symptoms of low blood sugar to the extreme before the coma took hold, including flushing, perspiration, salivation, drowsiness, restlessness, etc. Basically, it was medically induced hangriness to the millionth degree. And one of the long-term side effects was that patients would often gain weight because they were given straight glucose to wake up from the coma. Many even became obese from the treatments. They were also often emerging from therapy sessions, reported to be extremely restless, still sweaty, like I said, prone to additional bouts of insulin shock, including convulsions. And some patients reportedly lost a lot of their long-term memory, and some experienced brain damage and even death.
That sounds like a great time.
So one of the most shocking truths is that many patients...
Shocking.
Yeah. Oh, this is the insulin therapy, not the shocky one. One of the most sour truths is that many patients that did get brain damage were declared cured because in their new, more vegetative state, they were declared to be less hostile and exhibited less tension.
Well, they look happy.
If we can't cure you, we can at least permanently damage you in a way that seems more palatable to the general public, I suppose.
Well, that's happy drool.
Then in the late 1950s, randomized controlled studies revealed that insulin shock therapy was no more effective than psychiatric medications, and by the 1970s, it had completely fallen out of use in the United States, and now it's viewed as barbaric, which it absolutely was. Now I have to tell you what Deborah Doroshow wrote about why this treatment was widely uncriticized in psychiatry. She said that administering insulin made psychiatry seem like a more legitimate medical field. And a British psychiatrist, Harold Bourne, agreed. and said that it gave the psychiatrists something to do and made them feel like real doctors.
Wow.
Now, don't come at me, psychiatrists. These are not my words.
Come at me.
So basically, what I'm saying is that St. Elizabeth's took in mentally ill patients and then potentially brain damaged them, because if there's one thing that a mentally ill person needs to thrive despite chemical imbalances, it's brain damage.
You know, sunshine, water, food, shelter, clothing. It's okay. What you really need is a good old dose of brain damage.
So let's take the paranoid people and then make their brains work less effectively at being able to parse reality. Looking back, it sounds so absurd, but this was something psychiatrists and neuroscientists truly believed in at the time, which scares me into wondering what we're doing to our bodies today because doctors tell us it's healthy that future generations will look back on and shake their heads at.
So many things.
Now, did these psychiatrists want to hurt their patients? No.
I don't think they're quite that sick.
They honestly thought that this was how they could not just help their patients, but actually cure them. These are those good intentions that I mentioned earlier, the same ones that pave the roadways that lead to hell. And then we have the ignorance. I mean, they thought brain damage was a cure for schizophrenia, and that more docile meant more better. But at least the doctors and nurses weren't totally devoid of concern for the trauma their patients experienced at their hands, and made sure that these patients had some crutches to help them cope with the experience. They let them smoke. We're going to traumatize the crap out of you and then offer you lung cancer and nicotine addiction to make up for it.
I don't think it was ever viewed like that while they were doing it. Like, that's a relief to you to have a smoke. You'll maybe, if you do a little research, you'll notice that the majority of people with issues like schizophrenia are smokers. And there's something that their brain doesn't get that they're trying to get.
So the patients at St. Elizabeth's were allowed to smoke during the day. But no one goes to bed with cigarettes or matches in their possession. These things would be removed from the patients at bedtime for safety. Lung cancer, memory loss, nicotine addiction, and brain damage is all fine, but don't get caught smoking in bed. But not letting people smoke in bed is honestly a good policy, just so you know. But it just seems odd to give patients access to lighters and matches during the day and then just collect them at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't seem like it would be hard to hide one. Seems like that's something that would be really hard to accurately control. And this is where the ominous foreshadowing music would play in the movie.
Dun, 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 dun.
And this... And this wasn't the only good intention that was redirected to hell through ignorance. Let's talk about the building itself. St. Elizabeth's sat on the Mercy Hospital campus, and it was connected to the main hospital and to other buildings on campus by underground tunnels. The building was brick construction, built all the way back in the 1870s. It had a partially sunken basement and then 3 stories over top of the basement. It was over 30 feet tall at its tallest point and was just shy of 25,000 square feet, and it could house around 80 people, including staff. In order to keep their patients contained, iron bars were fitted over the outside of the windows after a patient had reportedly once jumped to their demise. These iron bars were bolted to the window frame, and only some of the building's iron bars had locking mechanisms that could be opened with a key. The others had to either be cut through, or the bolts that held them to the walls had to be chopped out of the frame with an axe or saw. Surely some of the patients could have potentially evacuated using stairs, except that in order to keep the patients confined to the correct floors, the stair doors remained locked. But there was a fire escape. We'll talk more about that. In addition, the interior of the building was so old that it was almost exclusively made of wood inside, and not just old wood, but varnished old wood that had recently been revarnished, so it made excellent fuel for a fire. And if there's one good way to spread a fire from floor to floor, unprotected vertical shafts, like dumbwaiters.
You can spread other things with unprotected vertical shafts too, like diseases. Maybe you didn't think about that when you wrote it.
I didn't.
That's what I'm here for.
Unprotected vertical shafts like dumbwaiters and ventilation shafts. In today's building and fire codes, we don't allow floors to be interconnected without fire-rated enclosures, but St. Elizabeth's was built before such requirements existed, and so not only does it appear the stairs weren't rated, but it also had dumbwaiters. For those of you not familiar with a dumbwaiter, it's like a mini elevator.
It's not like the guy who got your drink wrong.
No. And like elevator shafts, dumbwaiter shafts that aren't protected allow smoke, hot fire gases, and the fire itself to easily travel vertically from floor to floor. So they're basically interior chimneys. Also, the building did not have smoke detectors, but this is understandable. While smoke detection technology and even some devices existed at this time, they weren't very common until the mid-1960s, when the first home smoke detectors that featured replaceable batteries were produced. However, and here's a fun piece of trivia, building fire sprinkler systems actually predate mass-produced smoke detection devices. By the 1950s, fire sprinkler systems were available. In fact, beginning back in the 1870s, the first buildings in the United States, typically factory and industrial occupancies, began incorporating fire sprinklers.
I did not know that.
And the man credited with creating the first practical automatic sprinkler head in 1874 was a piano factory owner named Henry S. Parmalee. And he improved on the design of Philip Pratt, who initially patented the first automatic fire sprinkler system in 1872. And the building also had no fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers were actually developed in the early 1700s, and by 1950 they were becoming increasingly common for home use, so they absolutely could have had fire extinguishers, but they didn't. So, St. Elizabeth's had no fire sprinklers, and during an assessment of the facility 2 years prior to the fire department had recommended sprinklers be installed. And this is still an issue we run in today. People have this false sense of security that fires are unlikely to happen and that they just can't justify the cost of a sprinkler system, and that's exactly what happened at St. Elizabeth's. So no sprinkler system was installed. So no fire alarm system, no sprinkler system, no fire extinguishers.
But they had electricity?
They did. So we have an ancient tinderbox of a building with locked exits, barred windows, full of mentally ill patients, and doctors spend their days intentionally causing additional brain damage. What could go wrong?
It sounds like a great party.
But St. Elizabeth's was concerned with fire safety. You see, they disallowed the Christmas tree to be put in the building that December, citing potential fire safety concerns.
Is that like a metaphor for like the government and the people? Like, people are all crazy and the government keeps doing stuff to make sure they stay crazy?
It might be a good metaphor. So the Christmas tree was concerning, but the locked exits and barred windows didn't give anyone pause to consider the possibilities. See what I mean by good intentions mixed with ignorance? So now that I've bored everyone to sleep with fire protection history and psychiatric witchcraft, let's talk about what happened to make this Iowa's deadliest fire disaster. On January 6, 1950, Elnora Epperly was one of 63 patients housed in St. Elizabeth's. Epperly was 22 and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia secondary to trauma. Elnora had been involved in a severe car accident that had paralyzed her mother and caused Elnora severe head trauma. According to her doctors and her husband, Elnora became convinced that everything bad that happened was somehow her fault. She was only 22, and she was married to an iron worker named John Epperly. And the couple had been struggling to get pregnant, and doctors told Elnora that she required surgery to remove ovarian cysts, a procedure that terrified Elnora.
When you say struggling, could you unpack that a little?
That's the only information I have. After a second opinion confirmed the first doctor's diagnosis, Elnora underwent the procedure and was told afterwards that her ovarian cysts weren't her only problem. They told her that there were problems with her uterus, which had not fully developed, and that she would never conceive a baby, which absolutely crushed the young wife that wanted nothing more than to be a mother. Now remember, this was in the 1950s. A housewife was expected to have babies and raise them. And in addition to the brain trauma from her accident, her life plan had just been completely upended. And then Elnora began having hallucinations. And her beliefs that she caused all the bad things to happen around her ballooned until earthquakes and weather events around the world were somehow caused by her actions in her own mind. Terrified for his wife, John reached out to their doctor, and ultimately Elnora was diagnosed as schizophrenic and admitted to St. Elizabeth's for insulin shock therapy in December of 1949. Now, Elnora had not completed a full cycle of insulin shock therapy, having only been admitted 3 weeks prior, but she was still scheduled to be released the next day on January 7th. The fact was that doctors had told John that his wife was not responding to the treatment, and and that it was time to seek more advanced treatments from other medical facilities.
Like what?
I don't know. I didn't dive into it. So John came to the hospital the evening of January 6th to visit his wife, and they reportedly had a lovely visit, playing cards and chatting with other residents, and John planned to return early the next day to pick up his wife and take her home while they worked on a placement at another medical facility that might be able to help Elnora. That day, January 6th, Elnora had been given insulin shock therapy earlier in the day, her last treatment before she was to be released. And while visiting with her husband, Elnora smoked cigarettes, and she used the lighter that she had given her husband as a wedding gift, the lighter with his initials engraved in them. When John left, Elnora was reported by a staff member to seem agitated and restless. Now, the hospital was staffed at night. Nurses and orderlies would get the patients up to bed, and then after everyone was in bed around 11 o'clock, only 2 staff members would remain at the hospital overnight on duty. Only 1 staff member reportedly was up all night. The other staff member was permitted to go sleep in a room and just to get up if they were needed. From the sources I read, it seems that the late shift nurses left at 11, and that's when the 2 night staff took over, with all the patients already safely tucked into bed. On this particular night, Elnora was giving late shift nurse Lucille Calloway a rough time. Calloway said Elnora seemed really confused, and when Calloway settled her in for the night and she removed the cigarettes and matches from Elnora's room, Elnora puzzlingly said to her, "I won't hurt anything." Calloway dismissed the remark and attempted to continue settling Elnora for bed. But every time she turned around, she'd find Elnora. She was trying to get into other patients' rooms, while Calloway was trying to get them settled for bed, or she was wandering the facility into places that she wasn't supposed to be, and every time Calloway would patiently usher her back to her room, advising the woman that she just needed to stop worrying and get some rest. John would be back to get her in the morning. And Elnora would promise to stay put, and the next time Calloway turned around, Elnora would be wandering into another room, agitated and confused.
I like this lady.
And it was causing other patients to begin getting agitated and confused. So in desperation, Calloway escorted Elnora back to her room and used the hook and eye lock on the outside of Elnora's door to prevent the woman from leaving her room again while she finished her duties.
But I thought you were talking about like a submission technique. That sounded terrifying. Put you in an eye lock. That's not good.
No, the hook and eye closure. Because now you're not allowed to use a hook and eye closure in a building. Once she was done, she returned to Elnora's room to check on her and found the woman still confused and agitated but in bed. So Calloway decided that she would stay and talk to Elnora and listen to her concerns, and hopefully that would calm the woman to a point that she might become drowsy and at least be able to get some sleep. But Elnora was still irritated and became very curt with her, responding to the woman's coaxing questions and concerns by telling her that she just needed to think and be left alone to think. Giving in, Calloway retreated, once again locking Elnora's door on the way out to ensure she didn't go roaming the halls stirring up the other patients. After all, there's only 2 nurses on duty after 11 p.m., and they didn't need an entire floor of agitated patients to deal with. And all was quiet until around 2 a.m., when Elnora, locked in her second-floor room, became desperate to escape. Elnora had struggled with the limitations placed upon her movement while she was a patient at St. Elizabeth's. She would later reveal to investigators that she felt the nurses would just lock her in her room whenever they felt like it, and she resented that she couldn't go outside unless there was a nurse that could take her so that she could get some fresh air. So this lack of freedom and this containment made her feel uneasy and triggered her overactive imagination, inciting paranoia. On this night, she became upset about being locked in her room. If she was being released the next day, why lock her in? Why did it matter? Somehow, she became convinced that they were intentionally keeping her away from John, and that bloomed into a fear that something or someone was out to hurt her husband, and she had to do something, anything, to stop them and get to her husband. So Elnora pulled out the lighter, her husband's lighter, with his engraved initials, and took the newspaper that he'd brought her earlier that day. She lit the paper on fire, and then lit the curtains on fire, and ran to the door, banging on it and screaming as the fire rapidly consumed the curtains and spread to the varnished wood, creeping across the ceiling. Elnora banged on the door, screaming, "Help! Fire! Help!" And the night nurse, Anna Neal, ran to release Elnora from her room. By the time Neal got the door unlocked, the fire had reached the dumbwaiter shaft, which was located within Elnora's room. Elnora ran from her room and into the room of her friend Marilyn Beals, shouting that there was a fire and instructing Beals to follow her. And then Elnora ran for the front of the building. There, her route was halted by the presence of a locked door. So Elnora found a chair that she hurled through the glass window in the doors until she could reach through and unlock the door, but she badly cut her thumb in the process. As she ran toward the front of the hospital, she tossed John's lighter into a room she passed on the first floor and fled the building. Inside the building, terror as patients and the other night nurse awoke and realized the building was on fire. It took only moments for the fire to spread up the dumbwaiter shaft to the 3rd and 4th floors, which were filled to capacity with sleeping patients contained within rooms that opened onto a corridor that was filling with superheated gases and flames, and windows that were covered with iron bars. But Elnora did not flee. She was found wandering around the building injured during the melee that followed and was escorted to the main hospital to have her cuts treated by Dr. Newfield. While her cuts were being tended to, Elnora asked the nurse treating her, quote, "Did I cause a lot of trouble?" unquote. But the nurse failed to recognize that Elnora was referring to the fire. Elnora was taken to a bed inside Mercy Hospital where she would remain overnight until her husband could come and get her, and the nurse attached restraints to her arms and legs to prevent her from leaving the bed until she could be released into the custody of her husband the next day. Dr. Newfield then moved on to treat other patients after stitching Elnora's thumb, and one of the duties that he undertook that night was pronouncing the death of Anna Neal, the nurse that had released Elnora from her burning room. She had not escaped the building. Instead, she was rushing to save as many patients as she could when she was overcome by fire and tragically passed away. But the nurse wasn't the only one that Elnora had talked to that night. Others in the hospital overheard Elnora talking to somebody else while awaiting treatment in a hallway. They heard the other person ask Elnora how she did it, and they heard Elnora answer that she had used a cigarette lighter, and then expressed her hopes that no one got hurt. Outside Mercy Hospital, firefighters, cops, nurses, nuns, and doctors raced to try to save the patients from the fire. In some cases, hacking away the bars between the desperate patients and safety, as patients waiting right on the other side were overtaken by smoke and flames right before rescuers' eyes. Elnora had in fact caused a great deal of trouble. The nurse that had overheard the conversation reported to Dr. Hollander what she had heard and who had said it. And Dr. Hollander happened to be the psychiatrist treating Elnora, and he assured the worried nurse that she need not worry. This was a symptom of Elnora's schizophrenia. She tended to believe everything was her fault and it was just delusion. Elnora was once again taking the blame for something beyond her control.
That's wild.
Elnora later revealed to her husband that she had actually been looking out the window before the fire and had seen other people in a building far away, and that these people were going to kill her husband John. She told John that they had his lighter, even though at the time she had it. Elnora told John she'd set the fire in order to distract the people to save her husband. She hadn't actually been planning an escape, but when the nurse opened the door, she took the advantage that she had and left. But if this was just an elaborate escape hoax, she would have fled the hospital grounds, but she didn't. Firefighters found Elnora wandering dazed and confused, with a severe laceration to her thumb from her attempt to escape through the locked door right outside the building. And then she had sat docilely in the hallways of the hospital waiting to be treated. She had not objected to being moved to her room for the night, and the nurse indicated that she'd only restrained Elnora on the doctor's orders, but Elnora seemed calm, compliant, and nothing more than a bit dazed. Now, by best estimates, the fire was started somewhere between 1:45 a.m. and 2 a.m., and there was a fire alarm box just 100 feet from the building. For those of you that don't know, back in these days, a fire alarm box was just a box that sat outside a building, and if you pulled the alarm in it, then the local fire department got the signal at the fire station and would go to the box.
If it would have been an episode of the Flintstones, a little bird would have dinged on the bell.
Yep.
And another bird at the station would have heard that and dinged on that bell.
Yep, that's exactly how it would work. However, when the fire was first noticed by staff inside Mercy Hospital, instead of calling emergency services right away, the nurse that noticed it told an orderly, who then ran outside and began yelling for somebody else to call emergency services. But we don't know who initially made that first call. But we do know that the fire alarm box was never activated, and the first alarm call didn't come in until 2:06 a.m., and the first due department was luckily only 10 blocks from the hospital. Initially, 3 engines, 2 ladder trucks, and a chief's car were dispatched and arrived with 3 firefighters in the first engine within 2 minutes of the call. A second alarm was immediately called, bringing 3 more engines and another ladder, followed by a third alarm and a fourth alarm. There were 17 fire companies in Davenport at the time of the fire, and 14 of them responded to the fire, along with many second alarmers, which were volunteers that would respond once a second alarm was called on a fire.
Sure, that's a big response.
All told, 107 firefighters reported to the scene that night. At one point, a bystander counted 15 fire hoses working, and of the 8 fire hydrants nearby, all but one had been used, and the one that wasn't was found to have a broken stem. By 3:45 a.m., the fire was mostly out, with just smoldering remains, leaving behind 23 survivors of the fire and a grim task for firefighters to locate all of the victims. As they began recovery efforts, a shock awaited them. In her third-floor room, 45-year-old Mary Ruth Finnerty was located, complaining that she'd been almost drowned because of all of the water that had been poured on the fire, and she was trapped in her room. She had survived the fire and her own near drowning and the subsequent freezing temperatures, and was rushed to Mercy Hospital for treatment. Despite surviving the initial fire, Mary unfortunately developed pneumonia and died. She was the last victim to pass on Monday, January 9th, 1950, making 41 victims of the fire. Now, next week, we will wrap up this story. We'll discuss a bit more about the fire response. We'll talk about how investigators identified a suspect, the legal proceedings, and we'll bring you the conclusion of St. Elizabeth's fire on Crime to Burn.
We already have another cat.
I know.
Like, we have cat redundancy. No, I don't think we're going to run out of cats. Warm me up, because I haven't been talking today. Just because I say I'm a different name doesn't mean I'm a different person all of a sudden.
I know. That would make me a whore if you were a different person every week.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey, quit whoring.
Okay.
Would you?
Stay the same.
Can't. I don't even know who I am. I'm just holding back the vomit. Do you need a studio demerit?
Is there studio detention?
Yeah, but it's more akin to hard time, where I give you a hard time.
How's that different than any other day?
Zing. Whoa, boy. You ever hear about that karma stuff folks are talking about? I just figure if I give you a hard time here, I'd save you from a hard time in the world.
Oh, well, then that's a kindness.
See? Just like Buddha. See, now I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to get a demerit.
Oh, we're going to be in detention together.
Oh, you don't want to be in detention with me.
You're going to get us suspended.
I'm going to get us expelled.
You're going to have to stop purring.
Oh, that's mean.
I
Can't
can
tell an
hear
old
her.
ass cat like that to quit purring.
I can hear her in the microphone.
Is that the nerdy stuff we're doing?
I'm the nerd here in this scenario.
Or are you the nerd, or are you the nerd doing the stuff, or are you the stuff?
I'm going to talk about the stuff. Like,
What the hell kind of critic's asshole did you crawl out of? We're talking about 1950 right now, and what was Lionel Richie doing in 1950? He wasn't walking on the ceiling.
ooh, Lionel Richie would have been almost 1 at the time of this fire. He was born in 1949, June of 1949.
We're going to have to work out some kind of punishment for what you said about Elvis. Maybe they'll host it in VR. They do that, have concerts in VR.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Huh.
Like, very popular artists do that nowadays.
Too bad Elvis isn't still here.
Don't get me started.
Maybe I just need to exercise my appreciation bone.
What's that connected to?
Oh, good. Now there's another cat here.
That's okay. You got a minute while you hang your head in shame.
She's all cuddly and she doesn't even know I'm taking her to the vet on Monday.
Well, you just told her. Now the cat's out of the bag. Nope. I don't think you got your head around the question yet. I don't think cat kidneys and human kidneys interface. We're talking about the potential suffering of the feline community. And you won't do a thing to help them. It is the ultimate problem solver.
This is taking a dark turn.
The stuff you're about to hurt me with is real. But I thought the things that popped up are pretty cool.
I like it when things pop up.
Boing, boing, boing.
I know. I don't need glasses. I just need longer arms.
Who are you griping out just then?
I just needed to get it out of my system, I guess.
It'll put you on the Karen shelf real quick.
I won't fit on a Karen shelf.
Dude, there's a special place for you on a Karen shelf already prepared. Just don't get up there.
Okay. Mr. Grimes is clearly not a fire expert, nor... Bleh. Mr. Grimes is... Good grief.
Mr. Grimes is grimy. Put your hands up over your head and go... Oh! You're not doing it. You gotta do it with me.
All right, let's take a brief break from fire nerd stuff and talk about brain nerd stuff.
The hell?
What was that?
Brain nerd?
What did you hit?
I bonked my little table. It doesn't sound right, no matter how you express it.
I'm going to do it, man.
It's like if it was a planet, it would be Jupiter.
Now, the amount of electricity used is less than you would get from a standard 9-volt battery. It's rough.
9-volt batteries are rough, especially if you leave them on your tongue too long. That's not real. You are not in the real world with that thought. You'll appreciate my genius one day.
I appreciate you out of your genes more.
Let's introduce chaos.
Welcome to the chaos. It's all fun and games, unless you want to record a podcast. Then it'll drive you insane. It's the chaos.
Does it have a remote that I can just zap you with it? Just
I don't know.
You just go stiff as a board like a fainting goat.
That's 2 episodes in a row we've gotten to fainting goats.
I love me some fainting goats. Yeah.
I forgot we were all wearing headphones before I screamed. Lung cancer, memory loss, nicotine addiction, brain damage, all of that is... Did I say brain damage?
I hope so. Brain damage is awesome.
This is where the ominous...
Why are we pontificating on this point? Is it relevant? Oh, the matches. Right. I can't help it. My subconscious is doing a shaft count.
Oh, yeah? How many shafts did you
You're
have?
up to 6.
And had been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia. Is that crazy sounding?
I don't know what to say to that.
As long as we don't post it.
Late shift nurse Lucille Calloway, lots of trouble.
Better.
And cat
That's
puke.
Not good.
Ay.
Hey, you want to use your new light box?
My new light box.
Our new light box.
We have a light box?
Yeah.
I don't...
It's a mini light box.
What's it do? I like your box.
Do you have any idea what they're dealing with over there in Prince George's County? So many fingers and noses. So many asses to scratch. You see how I reverse psychology you? That irritation produced a reaction that was usable. This is why I irritate you.
If you can't get the records that you're looking for, you go to the ombudsman and... I think it's just meditation, right?
Ombudsman. That's how you summon a budsman, right? That's... Ombudsman, show up at my door. Your curiosity has exceeded mine. Where does it go? In your butt.
I'm just going to cut that part.
I'd like to video you running.
Jog. Briskly walk.
Approach at a brisk pace.
You know what I really want to try? Have you seen the finger mice?
What? What?
Maybe I just need a joystick.
It's invented for some reason, right? I'll give you a joystick. Come here, sit in my lap. I'll give you one.
Yeah, but if I control your joystick, you're not going to edit the podcast.
I was thinking about getting some rumble packs for under the seats.
3.
I cannot fall asleep in a theater.
Yes, you can. You slept all the way through the Joker.
All right. Anyone can sleep through that shit.
I was like, I'm just going to let him sleep because this is painful. And then you started snoring and I had to wake you up.
This just seems like low-hanging fruit. Like, these are obvious things to like.
I can't jump very high.
You're trying to blame your whiteness for poor taste in cinema? Like, God, why do you gotta like trash movies, though? Why can't you like something cool? I don't know how to fix you.
You better hope you never slip into a coma. I'm going to prop your eyes open and make you watch it.
I'm going to be a coma clockwork orange. But right after, we're going to follow that up with another viewing of Rubber.
Oh, dear God.
That's a underestimated, highly genius creation.
Controllers.
God, looks like a crazy jockstrap. What am I looking at?
I think we can be done now.
Hello, twisted humans. Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting? Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia. And I'm Sierra, and this is Twisted and Uncorked.